So as an overview of the book of Ecclesiastes so far, what are some of the highlights you remember from the beginning as we went forward? What style of book is it? And it's a book of wisdom. What else? An older person was looking back, right? And the conclusion is most likely that older person looking back was Solomon, which we just talked about. And the fact that he was given the wisdom by God and discernment greater than any man. And that is in the scriptures. We can go there and point to it. Therefore, when you see Solomon write in very special ways that wasn't necessarily discovered in other literature until a later time, we know Solomon already had it. The scriptures say that's the discernment that was given by God. I had established that Ecclesiastes would potentially be seen as Solomon's theory on determining the meaning of life. His thesis was that the meaning of life couldn't be found in certain ways. So he establishes how it cannot be found before he takes us to how it can be found. So what were some of the ways he gave us where it could not be found? And by meaning of life, we talked about the profit, the advantage, the thing that gives meaning. So it cannot be found in what? The temporal things, and he used creation and the cycle of creation to establish that. So we have the repeating cycles in nature that displayed the meaninglessness and understanding of the advantage of life. He continued then to give personal examples. In what way? You couldn't find that determination of happiness or understanding through any form of wealth. But before he went to wealth, he talked about specifically what? His wisdom couldn't be what brought him there. So if it couldn't bring him there and he had the most that God could give, that's not the way in which somebody finds that meaning to life. Then he went into the accumulation of the wealth, and with wealth came all opportunities to pursue in a temporal way, finding a meaning to life. And at the end of his life, he says, meaningless and vanity. I could not find it that way. Could not find it that way. Then we went into chapter 3. That's just the review of 1 and 2. And in 3, what was the most important thing in the beginning, in chapter 3, verse 1, there is a time appointed for everything. Everything under heaven, right? In the thing that we're captured in, which is time, which is 1 minute by the next hour, by the next day. What else? If you truly grasp that there is an absolute determined and appointed time by God for everything, how do you see God? He's sovereign over everything. There is nothing he is not in control of. And if that can alleviate some of your fears for what you see going on in our world right now, I don't even know where else to have you turn. He has a plan. He already knows the outcome. He's in charge, and there's nothing outside. So whatever it's going to be, he's not going to be surprised. Not only is he not surprised, he already knows what it's going to be, and he's going to make sure it's going to be that thing. All right? You know, I'm talking about the big stuff. I'm talking about in your life, too. He is sovereign over everything that you deal with, that you grapple with, that you think about in the future. Oh, what if, right? He knows, and he has a plan. Let that permeate your heart in how you live your life. So our desire should be then to know him who is sovereign. So that's the path that Solomon's starting to lead us to. And then last week, what were the highlights from chapter 4? What do wicked men do? They oppress others, right? They have no compassion. They're motivated by the desires to take care of self, not looking out for others. Men who step outside of godly counsel can fall to this as well. And I think, who do you think is talking about himself? Solomon. That's why he gave us the ending portion of chapter 4. And he talks about his vision and what he saw with King David and the part that Solomon gave as his testimony. So when you see those words, I have seen, those are key to I am witness to. And we'll see that again today. So that wraps up chapters 1 through 4 so far. So now we're going to get into the most easy chapter, chapter 5. There is so far no easy chapter of Ecclesiastes. I'm just here to say it's a little bit difficult. But that means as we mine it, as we look for the jewels that God has buried there for us, they can just shine. They can just shine before us in what we learn. And not just so we learn it and we leave it here, but that it will impress and make a difference here in how we live our life. Okay, with that being said, let's move to chapter 5. I'm going to be reading verses 1 through 7. Guard your steps as you go to the house of God, and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools, for they do not know they are doing evil. Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God. For God is in heaven, and you are on the earth. Therefore, let your words be few. For the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of a fool through many words. When you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. Do not let speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger of God that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the work of your hands? For in many dreams and in many words there is emptiness. Rather fear God. Can I just say there's a lot there? Yeah. So we're going to start back in verse 1. Where does Solomon direct his counsel to next? He says, guard your steps as you go to the house of God. When did one go to the house of God? In Solomon's time. Could be festivals. To sacrifice. To have an audience with God, because for them, that's where he resided. That's where you needed to go. All right. What do we do now to have an audience with God? We approach in prayer. So that is how we have an audience now. What is to be the desire of our hearts when we approach God, according to that verse? To draw near to listen. I don't know about you all, I am not a good listener. Very convicting, all of this. So if I'm going to be convicted, y'all get to go with me. Listening to God is better than what? Rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. Why are these men fools? So they don't even know that they are doing evil. And just as a reminder, when I say men, I'm not talking about men and women. We're in that group, okay? Mankind. All right, so they are so far away from the counsel of God that they are self-deceived and have followed their own creation for worship. Right? They've come into the presence, but not to listen. They've come into the presence for what they want to bring, their way. And we know that because we are hearing that it's a fool that does this. They do not come to listen to God. They come to sacrifice something to God. They are ignorant of what pleases God. They do the opposite of what God desires, which is why it's called doing evil. And to give an example of that, you can look in 1 Samuel. There's just one verse. It's chapter 15, verse 22. Samuel said, "Has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams." So sometimes we have a hard time grasping what's being talked about because we don't take our animals to church and sacrifice them on some altar, okay? But the heart motivation is what is the same. So if it was true that Samuel could say, those of you who show up all ready to sacrifice something, right, to do something for God that you've determined should be done for God, versus listening to what God is saying, you've already stepped out on the wrong foot. He would rather you listen and obey him than to come with your plan already in place about what you have to do. This is true for us as well. And we'll go into that a little bit more because the rest of the verses take us directly there. Okay? So men are to approach God because they desire to hear God or from God and obey God first and foremost. In Ecclesiastes 5:2, when men speak to God, what specific instructions does Solomon give next? Do not. He starts with a do not. What are they not to do? Be hasty in their word or impulsive in their thoughts to bring a matter before the presence of God. Does that almost sound contradictory to us? Right? Because we think, well, we immediately should take everything right to God, and then he'll. That's true. So let's go back and keep it in context. How could that be a true statement in what is Solomon's teaching to these people, right? What is the perspective Solomon gives in this consideration? What does he next say in that verse to let us know why he's giving that counsel? For God is in heaven, and you are on earth. All right, so he's starting with a little bit of perspective. Let's not forget we're here on earth, but God, he's in heaven. He has the ultimate perspective. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward. Since God has a heavenly view of our circumstances, how are we to approach him? Let your words be few. This is repeated for us by Jesus in Matthew. So we're going to go look in Matthew chapter 6, and we'll also take a little trip over to Romans. In Matthew chapter 6, we'll do verses 7 and 8. And this is Jesus speaking. And when you are praying, do not use meaningless repetition as the Gentiles do. The Gentiles would be those with pagan worship practices, okay? For they suppose that they will be heard for their many words. He who speaks the most gets the gift, I guess, right? So do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. God knows what you need before you ask him. Why are you supposed to ask him then? Are you asking because you need to change God's mind? You are asking so your heart can be changed. Prayer is about changing you to understand who God is. We don't get that concept often, right? In the modern church, it's backwards often. Romans continues in Romans chapter 8, verses 24 through 27. So Romans 8, starting in verse 24. For in hope we have been saved, but hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes what he already sees? Who hopes for what he already sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, With perseverance, we wait eagerly for it. In the same way, the Spirit also helps our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches the hearts know what the mind of the Spirit is, because he intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Prayer is about you listening and understanding what the will of God is, not what your will is for God. Little shift in words, big shift in emphasis and meaning. So back to Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 3, and I'll just tell you right now, this one was hard. Really hard. What is used to describe, and I needed to do this, what was used to describe the concept that Solomon had just been addressing? What does he start with in verse 3? So, for the dream comes through much effort, and the voice of a fool through many words. And can I just tell you, in looking at the commentaries, I was reading a lot of words from what appeared to be so. And I'm sorry, I do not mean to pick. I'm just saying, if you don't leave it in context and you just take a verse and then you try to explain it away, and it was like, whoa, that has nothing to do with the rest of what the flow of what this writer, whether you believe it to be Solomon or not, is talking about. So let's break it down, keeping in context of what Solomon is teaching us. What is a dream? A vision that we might have? A desire. So it's something that we would hope for, that we would want. Okay, that's not an abuse of the word. How is this dream to be accomplished here? Through much effort. What is effort? Work. My dream done by my work. Okay? Whose dream and whose effort? My dream and my effort. So that's the focus at the beginning of the verse. We bring that dream before God, because that's the context he's been talking about. He's talking about going to the temple. He's talking about going to produce sacrifice, right? It's not that you suddenly step outside of that. So it's what we bring of our dreams and our hopes before God. So it tied back to verse 1, where we come before God to sacrifice instead of listening to God. What we can do or give to God. Yay, us. Right? And we try to convince God that this is what we should do. And we know that because what's described next? The voice of a fool. And how is the voice of the fool identified? Through many words. So the many words we speak are to convince God of what we want him to do. We're negotiating with God, the creator of everything. It doesn't feel like that in the moment, but if you step back from it, isn't that really the heart of that issue when we do that? And it's in context of exactly what Solomon's giving a warning about. And have we not seen it displayed all around us? Throughout cultures, throughout time, all genders, right? It's not unique and just, oh, that just applies to them. Let's put that cloak here, okay? We see this practiced in our own day by those who name what they want in this life. Remember, we're talking people that have a temporal focus, not an eternal focus. So they want it in this life now. Then they use their words to claim it. We call it name it and claim it, right? So they claim it as though God will change his plans. We cannot bargain with God. That's what you need to understand that this book is all about. Don't bargain. Understand there's an appointed time and he is a sovereign God. Now, what do you do in response to that? This interpretation of verse 3 is verified in what is spoken in the next verse. So in verse 4, what specific example of words spoken before God are covered next? When you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it. What you promise to God, fulfill before God. When one only speaks words, what is that to God? He takes no delight in fools. Only a fool makes a promise to God and then doesn't keep it. When you speak to God, what should you do? In that verse, pay what you vow. Do we do that very often? Are we about making vows in public, in church, right? We don't really do that often. There's a couple things we do. When is the most public thing that's still common in our culture when we make a vow before God and witnesses? Marriage vow. Do not make a vow before God and not pay it. It's solemn what we vow before God. When do men often make rash vows before God, in your experience? When we're in trouble, we are on our knees, right? Or if we need help, or if we want something from God. That's when we rush there, okay? When the trouble passes, what do? We forget that we made that promise. Not that it was good to go there in the first place, but the point is, once you've made a commitment before God and you've made a vow, you better follow through and pay that vow, whatever that vow is. Right? I mean, and it is silly in the rash moment. Oh, Lord, if you'll just save my son from this event, I promise to go to church right? How many people have you heard share that? And they were going to go to church and they were going to have a change of life. If you'll just fix my husband, for goodness sakes, I promise to be this kind of a wife. If you'll just, right, the negotiations are always evident. You should never make a rash vow. Take your time before God, because he already knows the future. Listen to what he's saying before you make a vow. If you make a vow before him, then you should pay it. Pure and simple. I mean, our words should mean that just in our human relationships, that people should be able to trust what we say. How are we ever going to be able to do that if we can't make a vow before God who can hear it? We have a question. Yep. That's right. So we have the question, or the statement that was made in the room was that this was a reminder of what we see in the scriptures about Hannah, making a vow. Yep. So it applies to every time, every effort, every people. We have a tendency to do this in our flesh. That's our flesh responding when we do that. It's other people's flesh responding when we see them do that. Have compassion and mercy for them as much as you would have for yourself. Nobody else needs to be beat up. That's not what we're here for, to beat each other up. It's to help see what God says we should do, help others want to walk that walk. But most importantly, are you a witness of this? That's what this is about. Solomon, at the end of his life, is looking back, said, don't do this. Do you think maybe Solomon violated that? Yeah, I think so. So he's only a fool makes a promise to God and then does not keep it. When you speak to God, what should you do? Pay the vow. When the trouble passes, we already did that. So verse 5, after giving something careful consideration, it is best to do what? It is better that you should not vow than to vow and not pay. Take time and then do not speak if you are not certain. Do not make empty promises. It is only fear and pride that speaks in the moment like this, for how it makes one feel momentarily. They can have a feeling like they're a hero, or they're the big man on campus, or they're the generous sort, etc. Whatever the motivation in the heart is that does it in the moment. In the end, this person is actually the coward and the fool. And they prove it when they don't honor their own vow. When this is a character defect, it results in no one trusting the words they hear the person speak. I don't want to hear your words. I love that you say you're not going to do that again, or that you are going to do that again. But at some point, we stop and say, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe it when I see it. If we can have that kind of logical progression in our relationship with the person, what does God have? And he knows your heart. So he's not even fooled by your words. Verse 6, what is the result of this speaking a vow and not paying? It's a sin. Do not let your speech cause you to sin. So what else should the vow maker avoid? Right. And do not say in the presence of the messenger of God, oh, that was a mistake. Who is the messenger of God? Trick question again. It's not told to us here who the reference to the messenger of God is. All right, but who do we know messengers of God to be? Angels. Sometimes it was priests, right? Sometimes it's other believers that are, right? Once we all have the Holy Spirit, we all can be messengers, right? Who else? Anybody that's known to be a representative of God or declared to be that representative. You don't get to turn around, well, I said this before God, but now I'm letting you know because I know you got a special thing with God. So I'm going to tell you about this thing that I'm not going to be able to do because I know you're going to understand better than God's going to understand. So I'm just going to tell you about it. No, that's not how that works. Do not renege. Your words must be trustworthy. There are no do-overs in a vow before God. What position does God hold to in that verse? Why should God be angry on account of your voice and destroy the works of your hands? If you do not follow through on vows, then he will not protect the works of your hands. They will be destroyed. Now remember, God didn't change his mind. You just didn't do what he was asking you to do or use the thing or have the thing in mind he was going to do. So he's probably going to destroy it anyway. He's just following through on what he already knew. Your bargain didn't change his mind one way or the other. You're the one that just stands there and looks foolish because you thought by negotiating with him and bargaining that he'd go ahead and give you the thing that you said you wanted. He's like, no, I never intended to do that. But now it really is clear that you're a fool because I'm going to take away the very thing that you asked for because the motivation of your heart wasn't right. That which one thinks he will keep for himself instead of giving as promised in a vow to God will lose the very thing he thinks he can hold on to. The fool will have to give it up no matter what. Now he just gets to look like a fool in the process. Now it becomes more publicly known. We can see this in a clear story in Acts. So Acts, one verse in chapter 4 to give you the motivation of the hearts, and then we'll go and read chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. Quite an interesting story. But remember, the motivation is what we're looking at and how it relates to what we're learning in Ecclesiastes. So in Acts chapter 4, verse 32, we read, "And the congregation of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and not one of them claimed that anything belonging to him was his own, but all things were common property to them." Early church, the members came together, they vowed, here it says claimed, all I have is for all y'all. Because if they were Texan, they'd say, all y'all. Right? There's nothing I have that's not yours for the taking if you need, right? And we're all saying the same thing. We've all come into that agreement with one another. That's the motivation, and that's what had been declared by the early church members to one another. Then we go to chapter 5, starting in verse 1. But a man named Ananias and his wife Sapphira sold a piece of property and kept back some of the price for himself, with his wife's full knowledge. And bringing a portion of it, he laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back some of the price of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it sold, was it not under your control? What was under his control after he sold? All the funds, they were there. Everything was there, was under your control. Why is it that you have conceived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. They claimed something above that then they did not follow through with. They spoke rashly, apparently, at some point about something, but then later, when the deed actually came about, they had a change of heart. And they weren't even honest about the change of heart. They still wanted to look as if they were keeping their vow before God. That's what they were caught doing. And as he heard these words, Ananias fell down and breathed his last, and a great fear came over all who heard it. How would the walk of a Christian change if we had somebody struck down in the midst of life who didn't keep their vow before God? Let's just say it would have a chilling effect. That'll be my understatement for the day. Early church needed to make a very strong impression.
There might be fewer spouses.
There might be a lot fewer weddings. The young men got up and covered him, and after carrying him out, they buried him. Now there elapsed an interval of about 3 hours, and his wife came in, not knowing what had happened, because he probably wouldn't have texted her anyway. And Peter responded to her, tell me whether you sold the land for such and such a price. And she said, yes, that was the price. Then Peter said to her, why is it that you have agreed together to put the Spirit of the Lord to the test? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out as well. And immediately she fell at his feet and breathed her last. And the young men came in and found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Here's the point. Here's the chilling effect right here. And great fear came over the whole church and over all who heard these things. Do not make a vow before God that you do not intend to keep. So Ananias and Sapphira made a vow that all belonged to them, belonged to the church, belonged to those who'd gathered together as the church. They denied this claim by their actions, and the result was immediate death. It's a dramatic picture of the principle that Solomon is highlighting for us back in Ecclesiastes. And ladies, can I just remind you, as tough as that story is, to see the judgment poured out so immediately, let me remind you, he could do that every time. And the fact that he doesn't shows his mercy and his grace. It doesn't let us off the hook, but it shows his mercy and his grace to us. So back in Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 7, what is the reality before God? For in many dreams and in many words there is emptiness rather than fear of God. So, take time and think through what you speak before others and before God. Do not imagine what you will do for God, meaning the dreaming of the things that you're going to do for God, and then speak those promises to God, and then break your promises to God. He is listening. Your words have real consequences. I know this is a downer. We already said this is a pessimistic book of wisdom, but sometimes that's what pierces our heart. right? It's what convicts us to do and be different so that we don't live in the emptiness that Solomon is talking about. There is a different path. So now we go back to Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and we're going to do verses 8 through 11. If you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight. For one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials are over them. After all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves abundance with its income. This too is vanity. When good things increase, those who consume them increase. So what is the advantage to their owners except to look on? Again, hard to start breaking it down. We'll just go there and do it, starting in verse 8. What does Solomon alert us to be watching for? If you see oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness in the province, don't be shocked. Why should seeing this outcome not be surprising? He says, for one official watches over another official, and then there are higher officials over them. What is that a picture of? Bureaucracy. Every governmental system that you can come up with that's man-made does exactly the same thing. All the time. What can happen in layers of bureaucracy? Saying it is much better than me trying to spell it, let me tell you. Over and over, I butchered it up. Absolute corruption. That's what he's describing here. He says, when you see what? Oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness, and he says in the province, what would we say? In our city, in our county, in our state, in our country, right? When you see the poor not treated right, when you see justice not happening, when you see righteousness not being what prevails, where do you look? To those that are in charge of providing those things. And some would look at this and go, well, those things should be happening because they're watching out. One guy's making sure the other guy's doing the right thing. Is that what we see happening? He's saying, what do you look at when you don't see the right thing happening? They're watching out for each other for the opposite reason. They're protecting each other. They're doing the wrong thing and then covering up that the wrong thing was doing at somewhere along the line. Because if one guy's watching out over the lower guy, he's making sure he's not doing the wrong thing. That's not what this is a picture of. This is a picture of corruption and bureaucracy. And when you look around, do not be surprised when you see the oppression of the poor and the lack of... Hello, just turn the news on. Do not be surprised. You do not revel in it, but do not be surprised. Men with hearts not dedicated by God, filled with the Spirit, this is what will happen over and over and over. It's why there is no utopia found here on earth under the sun. It will not exist here because, right here, a government can never do that. What is the result of the oppression, of the corruption? It's the oppression of the poor and denial of justice and righteousness. Pure and simple. It's always that way. In verse 9, what does Solomon say to prove this point? He says, after all, a king who cultivates the field is an advantage to the land. So where is he going? Who is at the top of the bureaucracy of the government system? For him, it's the king. And we don't have a king. We got a president kind of at the top of our list, but you've got senators, you've got mayors, you've got governors, you've got other people that are up there. Okay? What do we see this king doing? He's cultivating the field. When a king cultivates the field, what is the result? There's an advantage to the land. By cultivating a field, see, this is where wealth happened for them, right? This is where you grew your crops. This is where you tended your flocks. This is where you kept your cattle, right? He took care of the land. He cultivated to make sure that it would be in production. He doesn't need all that production for himself. right? I mean, he can have a little garden out back to feed himself. It's the cultivation of the land with the goal to take care of those that are under his charge, right? We don't have exactly the same thing, but we have people that are supposed to be there to cultivate, make jobs available, make people have a fair system to be able to get a job, to not tax you too much. You know, they should be cultivating the ground for the people that they serve. When they take care of what they're supposed to take care of, the result would be a land that would provide for the people. Big picture, ladies, I know, big picture. And there's production. So what happens to the field that is cultivated, it produces. So there should be an abundance of provision for all those under the king's care. That's what it ideally should look like. In verse 10, what does Solomon say can happen when there is an abundance? He who loves money will not be satisfied with money. So when there is someone who loves money in this bureaucratic system of government, what is the result? They won't be satisfied with the money. That's why I made that transition for you. Their cultivating of the land is how they maintained wealth. We don't have that same picture in that. We have other things that maintain a environment for the production of wealth. All right? But it has the same connotation for us in our system, and we can see the corruption happens all the time. So what else is described in this system? Nor he who loves abundance with its income. So for some, it's actually the acquisition of the money itself, whatever is exchanged in a monetary value. The other one is all about just more stuff. I need more of whatever. More power, more things, more land, more people I'm over, more. So money doesn't fill it, and the stuff doesn't fill it. Those who store away the extra production or loves the abundance with all it provides these men, they will not be satisfied because it is never enough. For both of these, what is true? According to this verse. Here we're back to our vanity. This too is vanity, meaning it's meaningless. They cannot find what they need this side of heaven by filling in this way. It's absolute vanity. Spinning your wheels, spinning your life. So vanity is meaningless to change the world. It does not give meaning to life on earth. In verse 11, why is the extra provision vanity? He says, when good things increase, those who consume them increase. Does that make sense? Does that always happen? It does seem to, right? When there is an abundance of wealth, what happens to those who are around the abundance of wealth? They absorb the abundance of wealth. You can have 4 people living on a particular budget and doing just fine, and then more money comes in, and somehow those 4 people needed more to survive. It didn't all get set away in savings, right? Wouldn't you think that that would happen? If I had a certain amount and we were surviving on that certain amount, when I got more amount, how come we didn't just tuck it all away? How is it that we all needed more? That's a small thing I think, well, I can relate to in my own little life. Now multiply that on everybody's level and then put that at a governmental level, right? It never ends. It's a greed. Plus, I don't know, maybe when there's somebody that gives a lot to their people, the people that are in the counties next door come to the county where more will be provided for them, right? Or to the country, or to the family, right? They're going to go to where there is more provision. So not only are the ones that were already there consuming more, but there's going to be more to come to consume what is there. And that does make sense, okay? Let's see where, I was on 11. There are those at some level in the bureaucratic system who will absorb what is produced so that it does not actually reach the lower levels of the system. So that's another thing that we see that happens. So more come, but that's not what really matters. Even for those that didn't come in, for those that were already there could have been enough, but somebody put their hand in the till at some level so that there isn't enough, even though there was more production. This is why the poor will not see justice. We have stories of governmental budgets that are filled with this truth. What's your budget this year? Well, I need $200 this year. But you only used 175, so I'm only going to give you 150 next year. As a bureaucrat, I learned my lesson. Next year, I'm going to spend every single dollar and need more, because that's the way the system is set up. That's exactly how it works, or in this case, how it doesn't work well. If I save $25, I should get that $25 added next year to what I'm doing, because that makes logical sense to me. But again, we're talking government. Not going to say any more. All right? What I want you to know is it's not unique to our government. It's not unique to our situation. It is what all men do when they're not led by God. Okay? So what rhetorical question does Solomon purpose for the people with the good intentions at the top? What does he say at the end of that verse? What is the advantage to the owners except to look on? Why does no man make governmental system actually ever bring about true equality? Even the guy, let's say, for example, let's say here's Solomon at the top. He has a desire to see everything work really well. He's obviously the most wealthy. He has cultivated the land. He's got good relationships. They're not at war with anybody, right? All the things that he could possibly do from his level, at a government level, he had done, and he had done the right thing. Did it trickle down? He says, I witnessed this. There was still injustice, because not every man below him had the same desire to know God. So there was corruption. Does that make sense? That was really hard to get through. Just have to tell you all. I went back and read, and I was like, oh, wow, okay. Makes sense. I see it in my own world. I've seen it in every governmental system ever. We will always see that, because as long as we're here on earth, we have corrupt men who will be in charge. That's just the way it is. And Solomon started with, don't be surprised when you see. Don't be in shock. God, where are you? Oh, I'm here. God says, I'm here. I see it. There'll be a day of reckoning, but not now. So back to Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 12 through 17. The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep. There is a grievous evil which I have seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. When those riches were lost through a bad investment, he had fathered a son, and he had fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. As he had come naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Exactly as a man is born, thus he will die. So what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? Throughout his life, he also eats in darkness with great vexation, sickness, and anger. Happy thoughts. Verse 12. What can be true for the working man? The sleep of the working man is pleasant, whether he eats little or much. So this is a reference to what kind of man? A working man, or a laboring man, all right? Somebody that works every day for what he receives. That's the picture. One who takes care of his own business, maybe, or his own family. This man can sleep at ease when he sleeps, no matter how much he has or does not have. He's content. That means maybe he went to bed a little hungry, but he worked that day, he provided that day, and he can go to bed knowing he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He can be content. That's a big word that we're going to finish with here. What contrast does Solomon put forth in that verse? But the full stomach of the rich man does not allow him to sleep. Why would a full stomach affect his sleep? He ate too much. He just ate too much. It's overindulgence. It's pretty simple. It doesn't have to be more than what it looks like. I don't know about you all. I have eaten too much and not been able to sleep because I was miserable. And maybe I didn't eat too much of it, but maybe what I ate was really not what I should have been eating, and I overindulged, and I didn't get the sleep that I needed. As a matter of fact, sometimes I've had dreams, right? Right? It's just a picture of the overindulgence. So it's the comparison of the man who works, and he's content with whatever he has, versus the man who has so much, he doesn't even know when to stop. For no reason whatsoever, he just continues to eat more than he needs. Right? Consumes. It's a physical picture, though, of our lives and what we do in our lives. Are we content, or do we continue to go to the well and to get more and to get more and to get more when we don't even need it, because we cannot be content where we find ourselves? All kinds of things could be here. Where do you go when you do not feel content? What is it you do to try to fill that need? All kinds of words are there. He uses food. It's not the only thing that people use. Okay? And I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to let the Holy Spirit work in your life, in your thing. Because if I mention something and he's trying to convict you on one thing, you'd go, "Whew, she didn't mention that one. I must be okay." That's between you and your Holy Spirit. Okay? Verse 13, Solomon goes on to explain this how. There is a grievous evil, so he's not just evil, which I have seen under the sun, riches being hoarded by their owner to his hurt. So Solomon says this is an evil that he has witnessed that occurs on earth. What is that evil? The riches being hoarded by the owner. What is the result of this evil? The owner is hurt by the hoarding, right? So just like the man with the stomach too full to sleep, outside of food, it's true in everything that somebody would overindulge in or hoard to himself. So Solomon gave us the picture because most people can relate to the picture. He did the food, but then his very next verse says it's not just restricted to the food. It's everything. In verse 14, what happened to the hoarded riches? All right, for this guy, when those riches were lost through a bad investment, what other detail did Solomon point out? And he had a son. So for some reason, he's tying those two together. So the guy's got a bunch of money. He put his time into all the gathering of all the stuff, and somehow he gambled with it. He invested it, and it went away. Oh, and by the way, he also had a son. What's that? Nothing to pass on. So the father made a bad investment and then loses everything. And then what happens? There's nothing to support him. Who's the him? The father. The man who made the bad investment is the him that's being referred to. So the him made the bad investment, and the him had a son, and then the him had some consequences. We're not talking about the son. It's still talking about the him. The man who had the stuff. The man whose plan was to have the stuff. Verse 15. What else is true for this man? As he had come naked from the mother's womb, so he will return as he came. We all know this to be a truth. Nobody is confused by that. It is not like the guy with the most toys wins in the end. That's not the way it's calculated. Okay? What is used for emphasis? Right. You will take nothing from, I love this choice of words, the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. He will not take anything with him. This includes the fruit of his loins. I think that's why the son was mentioned. You cannot take people with you just like you cannot take things with you. I can find no other reason that there was the inclusion of the son in that other than to make it very clear, you don't take anything with you. Pour it all into who you have now, because you don't take them with you either. Now, that doesn't mean if they're a believer and you're a believer, you're not going to see them on the other side. But that's not what we're talking about. We're focused on things that happen under the sun. here on earth. And this is why I think it applies to that. If you will think about what Egyptian teachings are from ancient times, what did they do? Women, servants, sometimes children, were killed when the Pharaoh or the man in power died, to ensure that those individuals went with him into the afterlife. Not how it works. Not how it works. Sorry, it's cold, ladies. I don't have the controls to make it warmer in here. We're almost done, though. I'm really, really close. And then we'll go eat and get our little engines back to being warm. Verse 16. Does that make sense as to why that I think the inclusion of the son was there? Because since he's not talking about leaving anything to the son, it can't be about the son. It's got to be about the relationship. He didn't spend the time there, and he doesn't get to take him with him. So he lost all the stuff instead of being focused and giving to his son in the here and now, probably gambled with it and said, oh, I'm going to make sure you have more than enough. I'm going to invest. I think it's important he said invested. He took a risk, right, instead of pouring it into the son that he had right then and there and now. Some future dream. Now we're back to the dreams. Verse 16, how does Solomon describe this? This is a grievous evil. What is the grievous evil? As a man is born, thus he will die. What measurement does Solomon apply again? He says, so what is the advantage to him who toils for the wind? The first grievous evil, because he used that word earlier, would mean he would hoard to his own detriment. The second grievous evil was that the man will live his life with nothing under the sun. Both of them are horrible. The one who hoards and the one who takes risk and loses it all. So it's not about the accumulation of the thing here, is it? That's not where you find the advantage to life. And he says it's a grievous evil that's how man pursues his time here. Because neither of them have a good result. Neither of them give him an understanding for what he should be doing in life and pleasing God. Verse 17, before this man dies, with nothing, how does he live his life? Okay, throughout his life, he also eats in darkness with great vexation. That's a cool word. We should use that more often. We could bring that word back to fashion, right? Sickness and anger. So one who eats in darkness is one without what? Without the light of salvation or truth. Some interpreters put in here, this was a man who got up early and ate in the dark and then worked all day and then came back and it was dark when he ate. I think this is the punctuation that Solomon is giving with the spiritual impact of the life this man led. So darkness would mean, I don't care if he ate at noon on a bright sunny day, right? He's in darkness. He's in spiritual darkness. It doesn't matter what's on the table and what he's eating. And I think that's a fair interpretation based on the other words that he uses, which says, right, vexation. So the one without hope, what does vexation mean? I mean, we definitely don't hear that word used in our culture. What does it mean? Frustration, right? I can't figure it out. I was in vexation, ladies, as I tried to figure out what this chapter was about, right? Trying to figure it out, and it's not making any sense. Luckily, the Spirit came alongside me and helped to some degree, right? But these are people that don't have the Spirit, and so therefore they are in vexation about all that they see around them. They cannot make sense of it. My barns are full. My wife's making babies. I got all the good things, and how come it's not making sense? Why am I not content? What door am I knocking on that God's not going to open? You see the vexation? Or fear. This can often cause sickness in the body and in the mind to be filled with anger, because I can't make it happen the way I want. It's a selfish desire to make God do what I want, to make the circumstances be as I wish them to be. So lack of contentment is in both grievous evils leads to a sad existence and a sad end. We finish with verses 18 through 20. Ecclesiastes 5, 18 through 20. Here is what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and to enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he toils under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given him. For this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God. For he will not often consider the years of his life, because God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. I almost didn't know what to do with these verses because they seemed so encouraging. I was like, wow, what do I do with these? They seem so upbeat. So verse 18, what is the final conclusion of Solomon to what brings an advantage to life? He's back to answering that question. He says, here is what I've seen that is good and fitting. So what does it mean when Solomon says, I have seen? He witnessed it. He's an eyewitness to the event. How does Solomon describe what he's a witness of? To be good and fitting. This is opposed to, what other words has he used continually from the very first verse? Vanity and meaningless. So this would have to be opposite of vanity and meaningless. So he's now getting to something that's good and fitting. Okay? What is the good and fitting? Eat, drink, and enjoy oneself. Oh my gosh. Some of the places that people go with this scripture are absolutely ludicrous. Right? Eat, drink, and be merry today, for tomorrow you may die. Just live it up, because that's what Solomon was telling us. Yeah, exactly. Isn't that kind of the contrary thing that he went to? So I'm just telling you that's not what he's saying. He is making a point, and it has to stay in context to everything else that he's just been giving us. Okay? Where does this happen, this eating and drinking? So we're talking here on earth. We're talking about temporal things. When do these events occur in a man's life? During the few years of life which God has given him. You know, a person can live, 1 year or 101. It's still few in the big picture of things, right? So what is this considered by Solomon? He says, for this is his reward. So the emphasis is on that which is God-given. God determines the years given in life to men. God provides all that is needed to eat and drink. In this acceptance, man can enjoy himself in all his labor and in all his toils. When you accept that God indeed is sovereign over all, you're not going to try to change God. You're going to focus on God changing you. And when you do that, you will find the only form of contentment that God offers man. Know who I am. Rest in who I am. What you do today, you do because of who I am. The happiness of verse 18. Verse 19, what declaration does Solomon make? He says, furthermore, so in continuing on along that thought, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also empowered him to eat from them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. Well, this can be confusing because, of course, there are some things there that are hard to give a declaration of because every man that God has given riches and wealth. That's a really delicate thing to talk about, riches and wealth, because most of us in here are far wealthier than the entire population of the globe. So this is a description of every single person sitting here in comparison, all right? When a man has been granted riches and wealth, for whatever that is determined by God, what else has God given that man? He's empowered him to eat from them so you can partake in what he's given you. and to receive the reward, whatever the reward is. He's talking about reward here. He's not all making it spiritualized right now. And he can rejoice in his labor, right? There's a little bit here on earth. But again, only if the person has an understanding of what? Who he is before God, which would mean having a spiritual understanding, which would mean for us having the Spirit. Only when you have the Spirit can these things actually happen. Could we possibly mean that for every wealthy, rich person, God's given them an ability to find these wealths and riches in that understanding? Outside of knowing God, it is not possible. It is impossible. That's exactly what he's been talking about the whole time. He doesn't suddenly shift here with his happy verses. So what is this to be seen as, according to verse 19? This is a gift of God. It's not just the conclusion of what always happens. When we see it happen, we know that it is the gift of God. When this result is seen, then one would know this can only occur as a gift. Verse 20, what else is a gift from God? For he will not often consider the years of his life. So what does it mean for one to consider the years of your life? If I asked you that, what do you think that means in general? Okay. When I consider the years of my life, what am I pondering about the years of my life? What I've done before. Oh, and maybe what I'm going to do in the future. That's my considering the number of the years of my life. What did I get done? What am I going to do in the future? Where's my mind? All right? On what I can't change and what I'm not in charge of. Is that where I need to be? No. Because that focuses us on what? Ourselves. He will not be worried about how many years have passed or how many years will be left. This man is not overly focused on the past or the future, but content on the present. Why is this true? Because God keeps him, yes, but he didn't use that word here. But yes, we could have just substituted that in. God keeps him occupied with the gladness of his heart. God blesses this man with the things that are described as the gladness of heart. A man that is focused on the joys of today. A description of a heart steeped in contentment in the here and the now. Do you know God in this way? Do you focus on where God has you now? A believer, I can't say this strongly enough, and this is where we're going to end, so I'll be thinking about who's going to be praying as we close. A believer has the best gift God has to offer in the grace and the mercy that God has already poured out on a believer. In some ways we can say, once you have that gift, once he's given you a gift of faith and you have eternal life and salvation, there's really no other gift to receive that can ever come close. No matter what work you do, no matter what labors he puts before you to do today, he gave you, I mean, ladies, that gift, just imagine the most elaborate wrapping and bow and note for God, and you open it up and there it was, and you already have it. And nobody can take it away. It is who you are before him. And none of the circumstances around you, nothing in the world can change. You got the best gift. You live in contentment. You go before God in thanksgiving for what joys you have in your life today. And I'm not Pollyannish, everything's great every day. That's not what he's talking about. But he is talking about a heart of contentment. And I just pray that you can have that heart of contentment, because Solomon, the wisest man in the world, said, it is the only thing that is the advantage in life under the sun.